before I forget. And let me actually hit the right button. All right, and this is something that 11th graders, we did not get to last year. And so my introduction to classes for you guys was really quick, right? Say it again.
Yeah. I said you used the classroom example.
Yes.
It was like, but I still understood it though, so at least.
Yeah, and so there is this, so the reason I use the classroom example for classes is that classes and dictionaries are actually very similar. The major difference between a dictionary and a class is a class allows us to also have functions within a data type. So a dictionary just holds data, but a class is kind of like a data type that also allows you to do things within that data type and not just store data. And so a class is user defined. Just like a function, a class allows us to, this is how we would use it. We would say class, and then we would name it, and then have a colon. These three quotation marks, these are a signal to Python that we are doing something that is only for humans to read. It is different from a comment because this actually gets used by certain programs in order to create documentation, so that when you're reading through documentation for a particular program, this automatically says that this class pet represents a pet. That's what the three quotes mean. I'm not concerned right now that you're doing that in Replit, but it's a general coding standard for Python. So we can create an instance of a class by calling the class as if it were a function. Usually the instance is named by assigning it to a variable, and this variable is called an object. So if we want to make an instance of class pet, then we say pet and then two parentheses, open and close it. Yes, you can have something inside there, but we're not going to talk about that just yet. And then you will have an instance of that class as a variable, and that variable is called my pet in this case. That variable, then you have access to all of the data and all of the functions that are within this class. All right, that is called an instance. So here is an example of using a class. All right, we'll go, and don't be intimidated by so much code on the screen. We'll go through line by line here. This class pet currently really has nothing inside of it. All right, it's just an empty class, but we can do some things to it. So if we make an instance of this class pet, and then we do dot type, we are essentially defining this variable type on class pet, and we are saying that its value is cat. And then if we do dot noise, we are creating this variable noise on this class pet. All right, this particular instance, its value is meow. And then for dot full name, we are doing the same thing, where we are creating this variable within class pet, and for this instance, its value is Snuffles McGruff. Down here, we're creating another instance of pet. This particular pet is still a cat. Its noise is still meow. Its full name is Snowpounce Flurry. Flurry is misspelled, come on. And then we have here a third instance. I see your hand, David. This is my pet 3. Its type is cat. Its noise is meow. Its full name is Snicker Snorkel. Now, this type could be anything, right? This noise could be anything. This full name could be anything. We could have other variables that we put on this instance of this class, but the real power comes down here, where we make a list of my pets. This list is composed of the 3 pets, 1, 2, and 3. And then we can have a loop. We can go through each pet in this list, and print its full name. We know because we made this class that every pet has a full name, and then we can access that full name. And all of that information is contained in the same pet. In fact, we could say its full name, and we could say it is a type, and that would say cat, that makes the following noise, and then we could say meow. Go ahead, David. Still muted. I think it's on the computer itself and not on Zoom. I will let you try to figure that out while I move on. You can also type your question in the chat, and I will answer your question. All right. Any questions about this other than David's incoming question? I expect that it won't make complete sense until you see more examples. Okay. So for that code, we can call these variables on the class, we can call those variables attributes. All right, the values that are assigned to this instance are called attributes of those objects. We can represent this class and its attributes with a diagram. So this is this is Python code, right? This is not pseudocode. And yes, you can go to the bathroom. Just don't bring the computer into the bathroom with you. Okay.
Oh no, please don't.
Don't be like the Supreme Court justice. I don't know if you heard that, but the Supreme Court had oral arguments on Zoom. One of the Supreme Court justices brought their device into the bathroom. It was not on video, it was only on audio, but you could hear the toilet flushing. Yes. Okay. So this is a diagram showing us the attributes of the class pet of the object, and that this piece of data, this variable, has value dog, this one has value bark, and this one has value Lassie. All right. This object diagram is super, super helpful for understanding objects, for understanding how to work through your code and how to make your code. Ayana, did you have something? Or okay, how to make your code use the objects appropriately, how to use the classes appropriately. I'm going to flip between saying object and class, mostly because you need to understand that classes are the definition, objects are the instance. Like this is called an object, and often in the programming world, object and class are used as synonyms for each other. And we talk about object-oriented programming. You might have seen that term before. Object-oriented programming is something that is necessary to understand in the industry. And this is your introduction to doing that. So we can also have what are called embedded objects. Just like we can have lists of lists, we can have dictionaries of dictionaries, and we can have objects that include other objects. All right, so we would say that these are called embedded objects. Here we have defined two classes, a pet and an owner. Inside of that pet object, we can have a variable that contains a link to that owner object. And then that allows us to be able to manipulate that owner object. All right. I don't know why this is an error in their code. It shouldn't say me.owner.fullname. But it should be mypet.owner.fullname. All right. don't know why it says me, but this is how you would have an object within an object. This is one of those things that typically only makes sense once you started to use it, because there's too many levels at this point to really visualize. But again, a diagram helps us visualize this and understand it a little bit better. So we see that now one of the attributes of pet, this variable owner, now points to this owner object that has a full name. And the owner object could have other things. The owner object could have address, right? It could have age. It could have any attributes you want. Now, what this means is that ultimately we can create owners independently of their pets, and we could have multiple pets pointing to the same owner. This is the real power of having objects within objects. It's not just to make things more complicated, it's to reduce the number of times you actually have to create a particular data structure. So instead of creating 5 owners, all for 5 pets that are all owned by the same person, you create 1 owner, 5 pets, and you have each pet pointing to the same owner. We'll see a little bit later how to actually do that. It's important to understand how to debug objects. We talk about debugging a lot of the time. How do we take a look inside of a variable to see what that variable is, to make sure that variable is what we think it is throughout our code. But objects have their own unique bugs and errors that can come about. Declaring a class without any code in the body, just like we did actually here, this is declaring a class without code in the body, that will actually come up with an error. So this is an outline of code. This isn't full code, just so you know. It'll throw what's called a syntax error. If you call an attribute that hasn't been defined, we'll throw an attribute error. In other words, if you try to just copy paste the code, or you type up the code that I gave you as an example throughout here, you'll get 2 errors from that, because actually using objects requires a couple more steps. But if I show you all the steps at the same time, then I find that it's a little bit too overwhelming. We'll get to the next steps next week so that you can see how to actually code an object completely. But again, this is an introduction, this getting your feet wet in classes and objects. It's something that we'll get into more detail in 11th grade and 12th grade.